Like, the Indiana Fever fought so hard, but like, they literally had 8 injured players. They had 8 injured players, and Aliyah Boston fouled out for phantom fouls, and they still got to overtime. Like, you can't deny that. Like, you can't, like, the Indiana, they did everything in their power to try to rig that game in regulation, and Indiana just didn't go away.
What if the biggest scandal in women's basketball wasn't the one you saw on national TV, the blown call that sent millions of fans into an outrage, but the crisis nobody was supposed to notice until it was too late? For weeks, headlines have been obsessed with a single night, Game 5. The camera zoomed in on one whistle, one foul call, one star player walking off the floor in disbelief. But that clip you've seen replayed on social media, that was just the spark. The real story stretches back months, hidden in press conference soundbites, quiet fines, and a string of ignored warnings that now feel almost prophetic. If you ask the Indiana Fever fanbase, they'll tell you they were robbed of a fair fight, robbed of the ending their team earned. But the deeper you dig, the harder it is to blame only that one moment, because the signs of something much bigger were already in plain sight. Coaches calling the system malpractice, referees being protected despite outrage, and a commissioner's office determined to project calm no matter what was actually happening on the court. And that's where this story takes a turn. What looked like a single bad night of officiating may have been the moment the league's tightly guarded secrets finally cracked open. It's not just about a controversial whistle anymore. It's about whether the entire foundation of the playoffs was compromised long before that final buzzer. Think about it. How often do you hear 3 different head coaches, rivals in every other sense, agree on the same thing? When all of them start warning that the games are getting dangerously physical, when one of them is fined for saying the refereeing has become out of control and another is suspended for accusing the league of professional negligence, that's not ordinary playoff tension. That's a red flag waving in plain sight. So tonight, we're not just rewinding the tape of Game 5. We're digging into the paper trail, the fines, the suspensions, and the overlooked press conference quotes that hinted at an unfolding crisis. Because the more we connect those dots, the more it looks like Game 5 wasn't the scandal itself, it was the moment the cover-up failed. If you're a fan who's been replaying that last call and wondering how it all went so wrong, stay with us. By the end of this video, you might see that the real turning point happened long before the cameras caught it. Game 5 should have been remembered as one of the great playoff battles of the season, a night where 2 rival teams fought until the very last second. Instead, it's now a cautionary tale of how a single whistle can ignite an entire league-wide controversy. From the opening tip, fans noticed something was off. The Indiana Fever came out aggressive, confident, and hungry to finish the series, but by the end of the first quarter, the stat sheet was already tilting in a way that made people uneasy. The foul count told its own story. Indiana was racking up whistles at nearly double the rate of the Aces. At first, most assumed it was just the usual home court swing or playoff nerves. But as the game wore on, the pattern didn't just continue, it got worse. By halftime, the Fever had been called for more fouls than they'd averaged in entire games all season. Every time Indiana built momentum, a whistle cut it short. Meanwhile, the Aces were getting comfortable at the free throw line, cashing in points that kept them in striking distance even when their shots from the field weren't falling. The tension reached a boiling point in the final minute. The score was tied, the arena buzzing, every possession precious. Then came the rebound that everyone has memorized by now. Fever star center Aliyah Boston fought for position under the rim. Nothing unusual, just the kind of physical battle that happens on every crucial board. The ball bounced high, Boston boxed out, and then the referee's whistle pierced through the noise. It wasn't just another foul. It was her 6th. She was out. Fans in the stands froze in disbelief. Even Aces supporters looked unsure. Replays showed what appeared to be normal contact, 2 players jostling for a rebound, but the call stood. The Fever challenged, hoping the review would overturn what they saw as a game-changing mistake. The officials looked at the screen, conferred, and stuck with the original call. Boston walked to the bench, her face blank, almost stunned. For Indiana, it was a gut punch. Their all-star defensive anchor was gone with 26 seconds left in a tie game. For everyone watching, it felt like the air had been sucked out of the arena. The Aces hit the ensuing free throws, swung the momentum, and closed out the game. Final box score, 25 fouls on the Fever, one of their highest totals all year, while the Aces enjoyed a steady stream of free points at the stripe. The numbers looked less like playoff intensity and more like something was fundamentally off. That whistle against Boston instantly became the centerpiece of a fan rebellion. Clips of the play flooded social media. Commentators argued over whether it was a legitimate call or an unforgivable blunder. But beneath the noise, a more unsettling question started to bubble up. Was this just an isolated bad call, or the symptom of something much deeper?
That's the part that drew in the investigative crowd, because that moment on the hardwood wasn't the start of the fire. It was only the spark that lit up what had been smoldering all season. To understand what happened that night, you have to rewind the season story far before Game 5. Because what looked like one explosive playoff controversy was really the final act of a drama that had been building in plain sight. Long before that last whistle, there were signs the league's officiating was sliding toward crisis. Coaches were frustrated, players were confused by inconsistent foul calls. Fans complained about the game feeling unbalanced. But for most of the season, the tension stayed buried under box scores and post-game pressers until a single voice decided to speak out. That voice belonged to Cheryl Reeve, the Minnesota Lynx head coach. Reeve is known around the league as measured, disciplined, the kind of leader who doesn't pick fights without reason. So when she stepped to the podium after a late-season playoff game and chose to unload on the officiating, the room went silent. Reeve didn't just grumble about missed calls. She went straight for the heart of the league's credibility. Looking directly into the cameras, she said it was malpractice to allow that night's crew to officiate a semifinal game. That single word, malpractice, hit like a siren. She wasn't accusing the referees of ordinary mistakes. She was accusing the league of professional negligence, implying they were knowingly putting unqualified officials in charge of the sport's highest-stakes games. The reaction was immediate. Reporters pressed her to clarify. Fans clipped the soundbite and spread it everywhere. Other coaches quietly nodded along, but few dared to echo her words. The league's response was just as quick. Only it wasn't an investigation nor a promise to review the officiating system. It was punishment. Reeve was suspended. No roundtable discussion, no acknowledgement that her concerns might have merit. She was sidelined as if she had crossed an invisible line, a warning to every other coach. Criticize the referees at your own risk. At the time, it looked like an isolated clash between a frustrated coach and a protective front office. But looking back, that suspension was the first visible crack in the league's carefully managed image. It proved that complaints about officiating weren't just about heated playoff emotions. They were about something structural, something the commissioner's office seemed unwilling to address. Fans started asking why a respected veteran coach would risk her reputation to use a word as heavy as malpractice. And if she was wrong, why not simply refute her claims with data or transparency instead of silencing her? That's when people began to suspect that the problem wasn't confined to the court. It might be rooted in the way the league itself was being run. And as it turned out, Cheryl Reeve's suspension didn't put the issue to rest. It did the opposite. It sparked whispers among rival coaches, whispers that would soon erupt into open dissent and eventually collide head-on with the drama of Game 5. If Cheryl Reeve's suspension was meant to put an end to the complaints, it had the opposite effect. Instead of calming the storm, it told every coach in the league one thing loud and clear: the front office wasn't going to listen, only punish. Behind the scenes, other coaches were furious. They had been grumbling for months about inconsistent foul calls, about games that were turning more physical than they should, about officials who seemed overwhelmed in critical playoff moments. Reeve had simply said out loud what many of them had been thinking. But in the commissioner's office, the move was textbook damage control. Silence the loudest critic, send a message, protect the league's image. That was the fatal miscalculation. Because as Reeve sat out her suspension, two other head coaches, the ones who would eventually meet in that now infamous Game 5, were paying close attention. Stephanie White, head coach of the Indiana Fever, and Becky Hammon, head coach of the Las Vegas Aces, saw Reeve's punishment not as justice served, but as proof the league wasn't willing to confront the problem. Both women had decades of experience in the game. Both had built reputations as straight shooters who stood up for their players. And within days, both of them decided to speak up, even knowing what it might cost them. The league's response was swift and predictable. Fines. A $1,000 fine for Stephanie White, a $1,000 fine for Becky Hammon. Think about the symbolism for a second. The two coaches who would go on to battle each other in the very series now infamous for controversial officiating were just weeks before on the same side of the same fight, calling out the league for letting the games become too physical and too inconsistent.
Hammon's own words at the time were blunt but prophetic. The physicality is out of control, that's for sure. It wasn't trash talk, it was a warning. Rather than address the warning, the commissioner's office treated it like defiance. Fine them, make them pay, hope they fall silent. That decision backfired in more ways than one. Instead of burying the criticism, it exposed a pattern. The league wasn't just ignoring complaints, it was actively penalizing the people who raised them. Fans began connecting the dots. If three respected head coaches were willing to risk fines, suspensions, and backlash to say the same thing, how bad was the problem really? And here's the twist that still bothers a lot of fans. The same two coaches punished for speaking out about dangerous officiating, Hammon and White, ended up leading their teams into that winner-take-all Game 5, the game now defined by one of the most disputed foul calls in recent WNBA history. Was it coincidence? Bad luck? Or evidence that the issue they tried to warn the league about had finally boiled over on the biggest stage? No one at the commissioner's office has ever publicly connected those dots, but the timeline speaks for itself. The fines didn't stop the rebellion, they fueled it. And by trying to muzzle their own coaches, the league inadvertently set the stage for the perfect storm that exploded during that playoff showdown. By now, it's clear that the officiating crisis didn't appear out of thin air. Coaches were warning about it. Fans were noticing patterns. The question that kept surfacing online was simple but uncomfortable. Why would the league risk this kind of chaos in the first place? That's where the story shifts from bad calls to bigger stakes, because once you start following the trail of incentives, the whole controversy begins to look less like a series of mistakes and more like a struggle to protect a narrative. The most persistent theory making the rounds among fans and analysts is that the WNBA had a vested interest in the Las Vegas Aces winning. To be clear, no hard proof has surfaced. This remains a theory, but it's one that resonates with a lot of people who watched how the season played out. Here's why. At the time, the Aces weren't just another playoff team. They were a two-time defending champion, a ready-made dynasty with a fan-friendly roster and national appeal. A team like that isn't just a contender, it's a marketing machine. Every league wants its dynasty, a dominant team that pulls headlines, drives rivalries, and keeps casual fans tuning in. Now contrast that with their opponent. The Indiana Fever had been one of the season's best underdog stories. Gritty, talented, but banged up and missing key pieces down the stretch. While their rise was inspiring for basketball purists, they didn't carry the same spotlight power as a three-peat chasing Aces squad with recognizable stars and an established fan base. That's where the speculation starts. Online forums, sports radio, even some analysts began floating the idea that the league would benefit, at least financially and from a PR perspective, if the Aces kept their dynasty alive. The theory suggests that a marquee team returning to the finals yet again was a better storyline for TV ratings, sponsorships, and media buzz than an upstart Fever team that might not draw the same national attention. Of course, the league has never admitted to anything of the sort. Commissioner Kathy Engelbert has publicly defended the officiating system and denied any hint of favoritism. But the fact that so many coaches had been complaining all season about inconsistency, and then two of those very coaches wound up in the center of the most disputed playoff game, fueled the idea that the league's actions might have been less about fairness and more about optics. The alleged motive wasn't a secret plot to hand a trophy to one team. It was, as the theory goes, about controlling the storyline. A defending champion chasing history is an easy headline to market. A finals without them? Not so much. Whether or not that theory is true, what's undeniable is the league's aggressive narrative management. Suspending a respected coach for saying malpractice, fining two others for criticizing officiating, doubling down on public statements that everything was fine. All of it signaled a front office desperate to project order and stability, even as the cracks were showing. And if you look at it that way, the Game 5 meltdown was more than just a bad night of refereeing. It was a moment where the league's carefully managed narrative clashed with the raw reality on the court, and reality won. But the consequences of that clash weren't just measured in headlines or fan outrage. They were measured in something far more serious, something that would put players' health front and center. Every controversy has headlines, but the true cost is rarely measured in tweets or press statements. It's measured in what the players endure when the whistle blows, when the cameras move on, and when the damage lingers long after the final buzzer. The story of Game 5 wasn't only about missed calls or skewed foul counts. It became painfully real when Kelsey Mitchell, one of the Fever's brightest stars, collapsed during the very game that would later be accused of being compromised.
At first, it looked like a bad cramp, intense but manageable. Then the scene turned frightening. Mitchell struggled to stand, then couldn't move at all. Trainers rushed to her side as her teammates formed a wall around her. For a few moments, the crowd fell silent. The playoff atmosphere evaporated into something heavier, the kind of stillness that only happens when thousands of people sense something is truly wrong. She was eventually helped off the court and later hospitalized. The diagnosis shocked even seasoned fans: rhabdomyolysis, a condition where overworked muscle fibers break down and leak harmful proteins into the bloodstream. Mitchell described the experience as a numb, paralyzing sensation, like my lower body just wouldn't move. In the aftermath, fans and analysts began connecting her health scare to what the coaches had been warning about all season: the escalating physicality of the games. Weeks earlier, Aces coach Becky Hammon had publicly said, "The physicality is out of control, that's for sure." It wasn't trash talk, and it wasn't a throwaway line. She was sounding the alarm that the referees were letting the game get too rough, that players were absorbing punishment without proper calls to keep them safe. That warning was ignored. The league fined her for speaking out. When Mitchell collapsed in Game 5, it no longer felt like an abstract debate over officiating standards. It was proof, at least in the eyes of players and fans, that the warnings hadn't been taken seriously. A star player's health had been compromised on the league's biggest stage. This wasn't just a turning point in the series, it shifted the entire conversation. The outcry was no longer just about whether one foul call swung the outcome of a game. It was about whether a league's refusal to act on coaches' concerns had put athletes in harm's way. The human cost didn't end there. Mitchell's absence changed the Fever's rotations, forced players to shoulder heavier minutes, and left teammates shaken. Every player on the floor felt the tension, because suddenly the risk felt real. And in that moment, fans who had been furious about officiating began asking a harder question. If the people in charge had listened earlier, could this have been prevented? The Game 5 meltdown may be remembered for the whistle that took Aliyah Boston out of the game, but the image that stuck with many fans was Mitchell being helped off the court. It was a haunting reminder that when leadership ignores its own coach's warnings, the fallout isn't just about stats or narratives, it's about real people in real pain. That's the part of the story that turns frustration into outrage. The sense that all of it, the skewed calls, the silenced coaches, the hospital trip, might have been avoided if someone in power had taken the concerns seriously. And that's also why so many people began to believe that Game 5 wasn't just an officiating disaster, it was the inevitable result of a system that chose appearances over accountability, and the players ended up paying the price. The more you trace the threads of Game 5, the clearer it becomes that the meltdown wasn't just about a few questionable whistles or even one tragic night.
Those were only the symptoms. The real problem lay deeper, in the structure of the league itself, how it handled criticism, how it responded to danger signals, and how it valued image over reform. Look back at the timeline. First came the season-long grumbling about inconsistent officiating. Then, a respected veteran coach, Cheryl Reeve, went public with the warning and was punished for it. Soon after, two more head coaches, Becky Hammon and Stephanie White, echoed her concerns, were fined, and told to fall in line. When all three voices were silenced, no one was left inside the league's inner circle to keep the pressure on. Instead of asking why experienced coaches were sounding the alarm, the commissioner's office doubled down on the message that everything was under control. That was the breaking point. Because once a leadership culture decides that dissent equals disloyalty, it stops seeing warnings as opportunities to fix problems and starts seeing them as threats to be eliminated. That mindset turned a manageable officiating issue into a systemic crisis. By refusing to investigate or improve, the league practically guaranteed that the tension would eventually explode on the court. When Game 5 finally unraveled, it wasn't an unpredictable disaster, it was the predictable consequence of months of ignored warnings. This is why so many fans say the meltdown was inevitable. The moment the league prioritized protecting its reputation over protecting its athletes and the integrity of the playoffs, the outcome was only a matter of time. The controversial foul that benched Aliyah Boston, the collapse of Kelsey Mitchell, and the public outrage that followed, those weren't isolated flukes. They were signs of a sports organization that had lost the trust of the very people keeping it alive, its coaches, players, and fans.
And perhaps the most telling part, even after the fallout, there was no public acknowledgement that anything fundamental had gone wrong, only more statements insisting the system was working as intended. To the fans watching, it felt as if leadership had learned nothing at all. That realization reframes the whole story. Game 5 wasn't a scandal the league stumbled into, it was the flashpoint of a slow-burning failure at the top. A system designed to maintain appearances had finally been exposed by the very drama it was trying to suppress. As viewers and fans, we're left with a bigger question that goes beyond one night, one call, or one series. How does a league rebuild credibility after ignoring the people who warned them this was coming? When the dust settled on Game 5, the scoreboard showed a winner and a loser, but the bigger loss might have been the league's credibility. The controversy started as a single disputed call, but what it uncovered was a pattern of ignored warnings, sidelined whistleblowers, and a leadership culture that seemed more committed to protecting an image than fixing the problems on the court. The box score told one story: 25 fouls on the Fever, a clutch free throw swing for the Aces, a heartbreaking exit for Aliyah Boston, and a shaken locker room after Kelsey Mitchell's frightening collapse. But the timeline told another story entirely, that the alarms were ringing long before the cameras captured the chaos, and that the people who tried to stop it were silenced until it was too late. Now the question that lingers is bigger than basketball. Who should carry the blame for what happened that night? Was it the referees on the floor who made the calls? Or the front office leadership that set the tone, dismissed the warnings, and punished anyone who spoke out? And more importantly, if the same system stays in place, what's to stop it from happening again? Sports thrive on rivalries and drama, but they also depend on trust. Trust that the competition is fair, that the rules apply to everyone, and that the people in charge will protect the athletes who make the game worth watching. When that trust is shaken, it doesn't just affect a single playoff series, it seeps into the whole league's future. So, as the debate over Game 5 fades from the headlines, the core questions remain. Can the WNBA rebuild confidence among its players and fans? Can leadership admit mistakes and reform the officiating system before another crisis hits? Or will the league keep trying to manage the narrative instead of fixing the foundation? We want to hear where you stand. Drop a comment below. Do you think the controversy was fueled more by on-court mistakes or by decisions made in the front office long before tip-off? If you believe that digging into the story behind the box score matters,
hit subscribe, and turn on notifications because we're not done asking questions. And finally, if you know someone who only saw the viral clips of the bad call, but never heard about the coach's warnings, the fines, or the human cost, share this video with him. Every fan deserves to understand the full story, not just the highlight reel. Because in the end, Game 5 wasn't just about a single whistle. It was about what happens when warning signs are ignored, when power silences the people trying to tell the truth, and how long it takes before the truth comes crashing through anyway.